Before we begin, take a moment to support the channel. If you're interested in real crime stories, unsolved disappearances, and cases that still raise questions today, make sure to subscribe. Don't forget to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments. Your support helps keep these stories alive. Now, let's begin.
The chill that settled over the Salt Lake Valley on December 6, 2009, was more than just meteorological. In the Powell household at 6254 West Sarah Circle, West Valley City, the atmosphere had been thickening for months, a slow freeze of unspoken tensions and private fears. Susan Cox Powell, 28, documented the bright fragments of her life online. The crafts with her sons Charlie, 4, and Braden, 2. The family outings, her steadfast faith. Her blog, The Life of a Mom, painted a portrait of deliberate contentment. But the pixels hid a deeper, more distressing reality. To her closest confidants, Susan had been whispering concerns for over a year. She spoke of her husband Josh's controlling behavior, his dark moods, his obsessive fixation on their finances, and a growing emotional chasm that left her feeling isolated. She had begun secretly moving small amounts of money into a personal account, a life raft she hoped she would never need. That Sunday, the routine felt heavier. Susan attended church with the boys. Josh, increasingly disconnected from their faith, did not join them. The afternoon was filled with the normal chaos of young children. But as evening approached, a critical ritual loomed. The weekly 8 p.m. phone call between Susan and her father, Chuck Cox, in Washington State. It was a tether to her support system, a ritual so reliable that its disruption would sound an immediate alarm. At 7:30 p.m., according to Josh, he made a decision that would become the chaotic center of the entire investigation. He announced he was taking the boys, already in their pajamas, camping. In the dead of a Utah winter, in the middle of the night. The location, he would claim, was the Simpson Springs campground in Utah's vast and desolate West Desert. Susan's reaction is lost to history. Josh claimed she was asleep on the couch, and he simply carried the boys out. At approximately 8 p.m., the time of her sacred call, the Powell minivan was purportedly heading into the blackness. Chuck Cox waited by his phone. It never rang. He tried her cell. It went to voicemail. The first thread had snapped. The night passed in frozen silence on the desert's edge. Josh's story described a failed camping attempt. Too cold, too windy, and a night spent huddled with the toddlers in the running minivan. As the sun rose on Monday, December 7th, he claimed they drove home, arriving between 5 o'clock and 5:30 a.m. It was here, upon returning to the eerily quiet house, that Josh Powell stated he discovered his wife missing. Her purse was on the counter. Her cell phone charger was plugged in. Her car sat in the garage. There was no note, no sign of struggle. Josh's subsequent actions followed a strange timeline. He did not immediately call police. Instead, he put the exhausted children to bed. He later told police he then fell asleep himself. It wasn't until after 12 p.m., when calls from Susan's worried employer started coming in, that Josh finally dialed 911. His voice on the recording was calm, flat, almost perplexed. "My wife's gone," he told the dispatcher. When asked for a description, he fumbled, unable to recall what she was wearing. He offered the midnight camping story unsolicited. When West Valley City Police arrived, they found a scene of profound dissonance, a tidy house, a composed husband, and the utter, inexplicable absence of a mother who lived her life by the clock. The stage was set not for a search, but for an interrogation of a story that made no sense, and the man at its center. The initial police response to 6254 West Sarah Circle was rooted in the protocols of a missing persons case. But within hours, as detectives from the West Valley City Police Department began peeling back the layers of Josh Powell's story, their focus underwent a decisive and permanent shift. The husband was no longer just a reporting party. He was the puzzle, and every piece he offered seemed deliberately warped. Detectives Travis White and Ellis Maxwell sat across from Josh in the living room of his own home, now an informal interview room. They noted his demeanor, oddly calm, almost analytical, lacking the visceral panic or desperate confusion typical of a spouse whose partner had vanished without a trace. He reiterated the midnight camping trip, a tale that grew more elaborate with each telling, yet resisted logical scrutiny. Why that specific, remote location? Why not wake his wife? How did the children, one a toddler, tolerate such a brutal, impromptu adventure? The forensic timeline began to dismantle his narrative. Josh claimed they left around midnight and returned between 5 o'clock and 5:30 a.m. However, cell phone tower pings told a different, more confined story. His phone's signal placed him in the West Valley City area until about 12:30 a.m. It then went silent, consistent with driving into the remote desert where towers were scarce, but reconnected to a tower near his home not long after 5 a.m. The timeline for a round trip to Simpson Springs simply didn't fit. It suggested a much shorter excursion or a destination far closer to home. Then came the issue of the minivan. Forensic technicians processed the vehicle, a silver 2007 Chrysler Town & Country. If a family had truly spent a freezing night huddled inside with 2 small children, where were the expected signs? The discarded food wrappers, the spilled drinks, the general disarray of a confined, stressful night with toddlers? The van was found to be suspiciously clean. Too clean. There was an absence of. While Josh spoke to police, another critical thread was being pulled. Susan's friends, led by the fiercely loyal Kiersey Helluel, were not waiting for official answers. They mobilized, creating flyers, coordinating search efforts online, and most importantly, talking. They shared with detectives what Susan had confided: Josh's jealousy, his financial control, her secret savings account, and her expressed fears about the stability of her marriage and her safety. They revealed that just weeks before her disappearance, Susan had changed her life insurance policy, removing Josh as the primary beneficiary and listing her parents instead. This was not the action of a woman planning to walk away. It was the precaution of a woman assessing risk. The police executed their first search warrant on the Powell home. They weren't looking for a struggle. They were looking for a story. They seized computers, hard drives, and financial documents. They documented the pristine state of the master bedroom, the made bed, the ordinary stillness. In the basement, they found a set of upholstered furniture, a love seat and 2 chairs that would later become a morbid focal point. For now, they were just furniture. Perhaps the most damning evidence against Josh Powell in those early days was not what he did, but what he failed to do. He never participated in organized searches for his wife. He gave a single, awkward television interview, expressing a scripted hope for her return while avoiding eye contact. He quickly retained a high-profile criminal defense attorney. His priority appeared not to be finding Susan, but building a legal fortress. Every passing hour, his behavior etched a clearer picture for investigators. This was not a man grieving a loss. This was a man managing a crisis. As the investigation into Susan Powell's disappearance pushed into its second week, the spotlight didn't just stay on Josh. It began to swing toward the entire Powell family orbit, revealing a dynamic so strange and dysfunctional it seemed ripped from psychological thriller. The figure who emerged from the shadows was Josh's father, Stephen Powell. Stephen, a man with a history of eccentricity and failed ambitions, lived in Puyallup, Washington. From the moment his daughter-in-law vanished, his involvement was intrusive and unsettling. He inserted himself as Josh's spokesperson, giving rambling, defensive interviews to the media. He didn't plead for Susan's safe return. Instead, he launched into bizarre, salacious attacks on her character. He claimed Susan had been flirtatious and emotionally unstable, and he shockingly alleged that he and Susan had shared a mutual romantic attraction, a claim universally dismissed by Susan's family and friends as the delusions of a disturbed man. This toxicity wasn't new. Police and the Cox family learned that Stephen had been a source of profound tension in Josh and Susan's marriage. Susan had confided in friends about feeling deeply uncomfortable around her father-in-law, describing him as creepy and controlling. She had limited her children's unsupervised time with him. Now, with Susan gone, Stephen and Josh's bond seemed to tighten into a united, defensive front against the outside world. The situation reached a critical point when Josh, facing intense police scrutiny in Utah, decided to flee. In late December 2009, he packed up Charlie and Braden and moved them across state lines to live in Stephen Powell's crowded, chaotic home in Washington. To investigators and the Cox family, this wasn't a relocation, it was a retreat to a fortress. The Powell home in Puyallup became a notorious locus of media attention, with Stephen frequently holding impromptu, combative press conferences on his front lawn. For Chuck and Judy Cox, Susan's parents, this move was a secondary nightmare. Not only was their daughter missing, but her children were now in the custody of the two men they believed were responsible, living in an environment they considered morally poisonous. Their fight bifurcated: find Susan and save their grandchildren. They began a protracted and heartbreaking legal battle for visitation rights, facing the Powell family's hostile resistance at every turn. Meanwhile, in Utah, forensic analysis was yielding grim results. The focus returned to the Powell home's basement. The upholstered furniture seized earlier was subjected to advanced forensic testing. Investigators made a stomach-churning discovery. Suspected blood traces were found on a sofa and the floor beneath it. While the samples were too degraded for definitive DNA matching to Susan at the time, the location, a basement floor, aligned with a theory that was hardening into certainty among investigators. Susan Powell never left her home alive on December 7th. The midnight camping trip was a ruse to dispose of a body. The question was no longer if Josh was involved, but how and where he had hidden the evidence of his crime. The year 2010 bled into 2011 with Susan Powell still missing, but the case was far from cold. It was simmering, building pressure in two distinct jurisdictions: Utah, where the crime likely occurred, and Washington, where its aftermath was playing out in a tragic custody battle and a parallel investigation into the Powell family's secrets. In Washington, the spotlight on Stephen Powell intensified. Detectives from the Pierce County Sheriff's Office, acting on information from the West Valley City investigation, executed a search warrant on his Puyallup home in August 2011. What they found had little to do with Susan directly, but everything to do with the predatory environment surrounding her children. They seized thousands of images and hours of video. The content was revolting. Stephen Powell had been secretly and obsessively recording women and teenage girls from his neighborhood, filming them through their windows without their knowledge or consent. More disturbingly, they found explicit journals where Stephen had documented his sexual fixations on Susan herself, writings that corroborated his earlier creepy claims and revealed a deeply disturbing obsession. He was arrested and charged with multiple counts of voyeurism and possession of child pornography. The fortress had been breached. This raid had a seismic secondary effect. The Washington State Child Protective Services, now armed with evidence of a sexually predatory grandfather in the home, moved to strip Josh Powell of custody of Charlie and Braden. A court ordered that the boys be placed in the temporary custody of their maternal grandparents, Chuck and Judy Cox. However, in a devastating legal compromise, the judge ordered that Josh could retain visitation rights, provided the visits were supervised at a neutral facility. The boys, now 5 and 7, were caught in an unimaginable tug-of-war between the family who loved them and a father they were told to trust. Throughout this, Josh Powell's digital footprint was being meticulously excavated. Forensic experts scoured his computer history. They discovered something chilling. In the days following Susan's disappearance, Josh had conducted extensive internet searches. The queries pointed to a man researching his own crime. Terms related to body decomposition, desert geology, how to obtain a divorce when a spouse is missing, and the transfer of property after a death. He had also purchased large quantities of cash-only prepaid credit cards in the weeks before December 7th. The portrait was of a man planning an exit, not a man praying for a return. Then, in a development that seemed to promise a breakthrough, a source came forward. Josh's sister, Jennifer Graves, who had long been estranged from her father and brother and was supportive of the Cox family, revealed a bombshell to police and the media. She claimed that another brother, Michael Powell, had confided in her about a conversation he had with Josh. According to Jennifer, Michael told her that Josh had admitted to him that Susan's death had been an accident that happened during an argument and that he had to take care of it. Michael Powell later denied this. Whether confession or rumor, it echoed the silent certainty of the investigators. Susan Powell was dead, and her husband knew exactly where. The stage was now set for the final, unthinkable act. Josh Powell, isolated, facing the loss of his sons and the mounting evidence against him, was backed into a corner from which there would be no return. Sunday, February 5, 2012, was a supervised visitation day. A social worker from the Washington State Department of Social and Health Services brought Charlie and Braden Powell to a small, rented house in Graham, Washington, where Josh Powell was now living. The boys, aged 5 and 7, were excited. Despite everything, they loved their father. The social worker led them to the front door, rang the bell, and saw Josh greet them. As the boys rushed inside, Josh did something inexplicable. He blocked the social worker's entry, told her the visit was canceled, and then forensic analysis confirmed the presence of Susan Powell's blood and hair on this container. It was the closest thing to a physical confession, a morbid trophy hidden away, likely moved from Utah to Washington. With Josh and Stephen Powell, now imprisoned on voyeurism charges, gone, the case into Susan's disappearance reached a formal, unsatisfying conclusion. Without a body, a crime scene, or a living perpetrator to charge, the West Valley City Police Department had no path to a criminal trial. They closed the case, naming Josh as the sole suspect in Susan's murder. The official story was one of domestic violence escalated to its most horrific extreme. A controlling husband who killed his wife, fabricated an elaborate alibi, and years later, when faced with losing everything, murdered his own children. For Chuck and Judy Cox, the tragedy was compounded beyond measure. They had lost their daughter, and now their grandsons to the same man. Their fight for answers transformed into a fight for legacy. They established a foundation to support families of missing persons. They became advocates for legal reform, pushing for Susan Powell laws to prevent violent spouses from gaining custody. The disappearance of Susan Cox Powell remains an open wound. It is a stark narrative about the hidden dangers behind closed suburban doors, the failures of systems to protect the vulnerable, and the devastating reach of one man's actions. Susan's body has never been found. Her family still hopes for recovery, for the chance to lay her to rest. The ultimate truth of what happened in the house on Sarah Circle after dark on December 6, 2009, died with Josh Powell and his innocent sons, leaving behind only echoes of a preventable tragedy and questions that may never fully be answered. The Susan Powell mystery is not just an unsolved case. It is a reminder of a life that deserved truth, safety, and justice. Susan was more than a headline. She was a daughter, a friend, a mother, and a woman whose voice was slowly taken away. This story leaves us with unanswered questions, but also with a responsibility to listen more closely, to take warning signs seriously, and to protect those who may not be able to protect themselves. Today, we remember Susan Powell, not for how she vanished, but for who she was. And we honor the innocent lives forever connected to her story. May remembrance keep their names alive, and may truth, someday, bring the peace that justice never did.
If you want to keep uncovering the mysteries that linger in the shadows, don't forget to subscribe. Your likes help these cases reach more investigators, and your comments might just be the clue that leads to the truth. Stay curious and stay vigilant.